She thought she'd die alone in the crash, but someone broke the rules to find her. She didn't cry when her ship crashed, not when the engine caught fire, not even when she crawled out through the wreckage, bleeding under a sky that wasn't hers. She just sat in silence, surrounded by a machine she couldn't fix. Her only way home, dead. Then he showed up. He wasn't a soldier, not an engineer from her side of the stars, just a mechanic, a human. Grease on his hands, hoodie worn thin, voice too soft for war, but steady. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what planet she was from. He just looked at the shattered engine, nodded once and said, "I can probably fix this, if you give me some time." She watched him work. Hours passed. He didn't stop. He didn't judge. He didn't look at her like something alien, just like someone who was stranded. And when the lights on the panel blinked back to life, when the ship hummed again for the first time, she broke. Not with words, not with a scream, just tears, silent, slow, unstoppable. He turned, surprised. "Hey, it's okay. I just patched up the fuel conduit. It wasn't even that." "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "It's not the ship. It's the first time in my life someone fixed something, just because I needed it." He didn't know what to say, so he just sat next to her, not touching her, not asking anything more. And for a long time, they said nothing. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was seen. The desert air grew colder as darkness settled around them. Dust particles caught the last rays of sunlight, suspended like tiny stars between them. Her uniform, once pristine, now hung in tatters, stained with blood and hydraulic fluid. The crash had been violent, rattling her bones and tearing open the hull of her small reconnaissance vessel. By all logic, she should be dead. Instead, she was sitting beside a human who had wandered into a situation he couldn't possibly understand, yet chose to help anyway. "I'm Eli," he finally said, breaking the silence with his gentle voice. His hands, calloused and still smudged with engine grease, rested on his knees. There was an openness to his posture that seemed foreign to her. No defensive angles, no strategic positioning. She hesitated, measuring the risk of giving even this small piece of herself. In her training, identities were guarded fiercely. Names had power, but something about his straightforward manner made her usual caution feel excessive. "Nara," she offered finally, the syllables of her true name feeling strange on her tongue after so long using operational designations. Eli nodded, accepting the single word as enough. No pressing for more information, no suspicion about its authenticity, just acceptance. "Your leg is bleeding pretty badly," he observed, gesturing toward her thigh where the fabric of her uniform had torn. "I have a first aid kit in my truck. Will you let me help?" Nara glanced down, noticing for the first time the dark stains spreading down her leg. The adrenaline had masked the pain until now, but his words seemed to unlock it, sending sharp jolts up her side. The wound wasn't life-threatening by her standards, but it needed attention. "Yes," she said simply. Eli disappeared into the gathering darkness, returning minutes later with a weathered metal box. He knelt beside her, hands hovering above the wound. "May I?" he asked, waiting for permission before touching her. The question startled her. In her world, medical attention was administered efficiently, without regard for comfort or consent. Just another procedure, performed by technicians who viewed bodies as machines to be repaired. This careful asking was unfamiliar. "Yes," she repeated, watching curiously as he worked. His touch was careful, clinical, yet somehow kind. He cleaned the gash with antiseptic, applied pressure until the bleeding slowed, then dressed it with practiced movements. Not the advanced medical technology she was accustomed to, but effective in its simplicity. "How bad is it?" Nara asked, studying his face for signs of concern. She had been trained to read micro-expressions, to detect lies and hidden intentions, but Eli's face held only concentration and gentle compassion, utterly transparent. "Deep, but clean." "You're lucky. Missed anything vital?" Eli sat back on his heels, surveying his handiwork. His eyes, a warm brown that caught the fading light, met hers directly. "Though I'm guessing your definition of vital might differ from ours." A ghost of a smile touched Nara's lips, the first since she'd crashed on this remote planet. "Perhaps not as much as you might think," she replied, surprising herself with the admission. Biologically, her species shared remarkable similarities with humans, a fact that had made them ideal for reconnaissance missions to Earth. "You look human," Eli observed, packing away his supplies with methodical movements. There was no accusation in his tone, just simple observation. A convenient evolutionary outcome, Nara responded, falling back on the scientific explanation she'd been trained to provide if questioned. Bipedal, symmetrical forms are efficient across various environments. Efficient, Eli repeated, amusement warming his voice. That's one way to look at it. The ship behind them creaked as cooling metal contracted in the night air. The sound drew Nara's attention back to her situation. Stranded on a primitive planet, mission incomplete, superiors unaware of her status. The reality of her predicament crashed down upon her with renewed urgency. "You said the ship can fly again?" she asked, urgency edging into her voice. Her mission parameters allowed no room for extended delays or unauthorized contact with native species. Already, she had violated multiple protocols. Eli's expression sobered, professional assessment replacing casual conversation. "Short distances, maybe. The patch is temporary. You'll need replacement parts for anything substantial." He hesitated, then added, "Parts I'm guessing don't exist on this planet." Nara closed her eyes briefly, calculating options with the precision her training demanded. Return trajectory, resource requirements, communication protocols. Nothing in her extensive preparation had covered this scenario. "There must be materials I can adapt," she said, half to herself. "Possibly. I know someone who might have what you need, or close enough." Eli stood, extending his hand to her. "But not tonight. You need rest, food, and a better place to recover than the open desert." Nara eyed his offered hand, then his face. Everything she'd been taught about first contact protocol screamed against further engagement. Minimal interaction, no cultural contamination, maintain distance, observe but never participate. The directives that had been drilled into her throughout her training echoed in her mind, setting off internal alarms. But protocol had never accounted for a crashed ship and an injured operative with no extraction team en route. The rulebook didn't have a chapter for this. She took his hand, allowing him to help her stand. Pain shot through her leg, hot and immediate, but she kept her expression neutral, years of training kicking in automatically. Never show weakness, never reveal vulnerability. Another rule she'd been taught, though this one transcended species and planets. "My place isn't far," Eli said, supporting her weight as they walked slowly toward his truck. The vehicle sat 100 meters away, partially hidden by rock formations. How long had he been watching before approaching? "Nothing fancy, just a converted workshop at the edge of town." "Town?" Alarm colored her voice before she could suppress it. Expanded contact, multiple witnesses, the nightmare scenario for any covert operative. "How many people will see me?" "None," Eli assured her, his voice steady and certain. "We'll take the back roads. I value privacy as much as you do, just for different reasons." The truck was ancient by any standards, a relic that seemed held together by rust and determination. The technology was primitive, internal combustion, manual controls, no automation or AI interface. Eli helped her into the passenger seat, the springs creaking beneath her weight, then circled around to the driver's side. "You're not afraid," Nara observed as the engine grumbled to life, vibrations running through the aged metal frame. Finding an alien crash site should trigger fear, or at least caution. It was what the behaviorists had predicted, what their simulations had shown time and again. Fear, panic, aggression, the instinctive response to the unknown. Eli guided the truck away from the crash site, headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating a narrow path winding through the desert landscape. "My grandmother always said the universe is too vast for us to be alone. She taught me to look up with wonder, not fear." He glanced at Nara, features half illuminated by the dashboard lights, shadows playing across his face. "Besides, fear doesn't fix broken things." They drove in silence after that, the rough terrain gradually giving way to a dirt road. Nara watched the unfamiliar landscape pass by, mentally mapping their route out of habit. Documenting landmarks, calculating distances, noting potential escape routes. The behaviors were so deeply ingrained, she performed them automatically, even in her compromised state. Eventually, they turned onto a narrow drive leading to a solitary structure, larger than a house but smaller than an industrial building. Metal walls gleamed dully in the moonlight, surrounded by various mechanical parts and half-finished projects. A workshop, as he'd described, but isolated enough to provide the privacy she desperately needed. "Home sweet home," Eli said, killing the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the pinging of cooling metal and the distant call of some nocturnal creature. Inside was surprisingly warm and orderly. A main room split into living quarters and workspace, with a small kitchen tucked into one corner. Books and technical manuals filled shelves along one wall, while intricate drawings of mechanical systems covered another. The space spoke of a methodical mind, someone who understood complex systems and how to repair them. "Bathroom's through there if you want to clean up," Eli said, gesturing to a door. "I'll find you some clothes that might fit." Nara stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. An alien soldier in a human mechanics home. Her uniform, designed for stealth and functionality rather than aesthetics, was now torn and bloodied. The advanced materials, engineered to withstand extreme conditions and avoid detection by most scanning technologies, reduced to little more than rags. "Why are you helping me?" she asked abruptly, the question that had been circling in her mind since he first approached her ship. Eli paused, considering her with thoughtful eyes. He seemed to weigh his response, as if understanding the importance of the question. "Because you needed it," he said finally, as if it were that simple, as if kindness required no justification beyond the recognition of another's need. In the small bathroom, Nara confronted her reflection for the first time since the crash. Dirt and blood streaked her face, short dark hair matted against her scalp. A bruise was forming along her jawline, the skin already darkening to a deep purple. The person staring back seemed unfamiliar, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Not since her final trials, when they broke candidates down to rebuild them as perfect operatives. She cleaned herself methodically, watching as the evidence of her crash swirled down the drain in rivulets of rust-red water. The clothes Eli provided were soft and worn, a black t-shirt and gray pants that hung slightly loose on her frame. The fabric felt strange against her skin, lacking the technical components of her uniform, but there was something comforting in their simple utility. When she emerged, Eli was in the kitchen area, the smell of something cooking filling the space. He moved with easy confidence, stirring a pot that steamed gently on a heating element. "Feel better?" he asked, glancing up from his task. "Functional," Nara replied, the standard response when asked about physical status by her commanders. Then, recognizing the inadequacy of the answer in this context, she added, "Yes. Thank you. Hungry. It's just soup. Tomato basil. Nothing fancy." Her body's needs had been secondary to the crisis until now, but at the mention of food, her stomach responded with an audible growl. Her metabolism ran faster than a human's, requiring more frequent caloric intake. The emergency rations in her crash kit would have sustained her, but they were designed for nutrition rather than pleasure. "Apparently so," she acknowledged. They ate at a small table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. The soup was simple but satisfying, with flavors more vibrant than the nutrient-balanced meals she was accustomed to. Each spoonful revealed subtle complexities: herbs, spices, the natural sweetness of the tomatoes. Food as experience rather than just fuel. "Tomorrow we'll go see Verna," Eli said, breaking the silence. Steam rose from his bowl, curling in the air between them. "He runs a salvage yard about 40 miles from here. If anyone has what you need, it's him." "Will he ask questions?" Nara's voice was controlled, but concern threaded through it. "More contact, more risk. Of course, but he cares more about payment than answers." Nara set down her spoon, the metal making a soft clink against the ceramic bowl. "I have no currency your world would recognize." "Leave that to me," Eli replied with easy confidence. "I've got some rare parts I've been saving that Vern's had his eye on for years. Should be enough to trade." "I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," Eli interrupted gently. "I offered." Nara fell silent, struggling with an unfamiliar emotion. In her world, debts were meticulously tracked, favors recorded and eventually collected upon. Clean transactions. This open-ended generosity had no place in her understanding of interpersonal relations. It disrupted her mental frameworks, introducing a variable she couldn't properly categorize. "I need to check the ship's communication array," she said finally, retreating to practical matters. "If it's functional, I can send a distress signal to my people." "And then what happens?" Eli asked, his tone careful, neutral. But beneath the casual question, Nara detected genuine concern. "They would send extraction, recover me and the ship." "Just you and the ship? Or would they take an interest in the primitive planet and the human who helped you?" The question hung in the air between them. Nara met his gaze directly, owing him at least the truth after what he'd done for her. "Standard protocol would require them to assess the extent of contamination. Your memory would be altered to remove any recall of me or the craft. Eli nodded slowly, absorbing this without visible distress. And if I don't want to forget? Protocol doesn't account for preferences, Nara said softly, a fact that had never bothered her until this moment. Does protocol account for gratitude? For connection? Eli stood, gathering their empty bowls. The movement wasn't angry or abrupt, just deliberate. Or are those concepts too primitive for advanced species? The question stung more than Nara expected. We're not without emotion, if that's what you're asking. We simply regulate it more efficiently. Even to her own ears, the response sounded hollow, a recitation rather than a genuine explanation. Efficiently, Eli echoed with a small smile. There's that word again. He moved to the kitchen area, placing the bowls in the sink. Water ran briefly, steam rising as it hit the hot ceramic. You can take the bed. I'll sleep on the couch. That's unnecessary. I can... Please, Eli interrupted. You're injured and exhausted. Take the bed. Too tired to argue, Nara nodded her acceptance. Eli showed her to a small bedroom, sparsely furnished but clean and comfortable. A bed with neatly folded blankets, a small table with a lamp, a window looking out at the star-filled desert sky. Get some rest, he said, lingering in the doorway. Everything else can wait until morning. Alone in the darkness, lying on a bed softer than any sleep surface she'd used in years, Nara stared at the ceiling. Protocol dictated minimal engagement, swift extraction, and complete discretion. Instead, she had accepted help, shelter, food, and clothing from a native. She had revealed information about her people and their methods. She had broken every rule of field operations in less than one planetary rotation, and yet, for the first time since landing on this primitive world, she felt something close to peace. The constant vigilance, the perpetual analysis and calculation that characterized her normal state of being, had quieted to a manageable hum. She wondered if it was the crash, the injury, or something about Eli himself that had caused this shift. Perhaps it was simply the recognition that here, light years from her commanders and the rigid structures of her society, the old rules no longer applied. New ones would have to be created, adapted to her current reality. With that thought, she allowed herself to slip into sleep. Not the regulated rest cycles of her training, but true deep sleep. Morning arrived with the scent of something rich and unfamiliar. Nara opened her eyes to sunlight filtering through thin curtains, momentarily disoriented before memory reasserted itself. Earth. Crash. Eli. Her uniform had been cleaned and folded neatly on a chair, the worst tears mended with careful stitches. But beside it lay the borrowed clothes from the night before, freshly laundered. She chose the latter, noting with clinical detachment that the decision was not entirely practical. The uniform would identify her to any rescue team. The human clothes would not. She found Eli in the kitchen, humming softly as he flipped something in a pan. The melody was unfamiliar but pleasant, rising and falling in a pattern that suggested contentment. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. Morning. Hope you like pancakes. I wouldn't know, Nara admitted, moving closer to observe the cooking process. The flat discs sizzled in the pan, golden brown and emitting a sweet aroma. First time for everything, Eli replied, sliding a pancake onto a plate. Coffee? The breakfast was another revelation of flavors. Sweet syrup, bitter coffee, the subtle tang of berries. Nara ate methodically at first, then with increasing enjoyment as her taste receptors adjusted to the intensity. Food on her world was engineered for optimal nutrition and minimal resource usage. Taste was secondary, considered an unnecessary indulgence. This is... She searched for an appropriate word. Good. Very good. Eli's pleased expression suggested her approval meant something to him, another unfamiliar dynamic, her opinion affecting someone else's emotional state in such a direct way. On her world, satisfaction was expected, but not acknowledged. Efficiency was the highest praise. After breakfast, they drove to Verna's salvage yard in comfortable silence. The landscape shifted from desert to scrubland, dotted with small towns and isolated structures. Nara cataloged everything, building a mental map with the precision of her training. Verna's operations sprawled across several acres, surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Mountains of metal parts, defunct vehicles, and unidentifiable machinery created a labyrinthine junkyard that seemed to stretch endlessly. The chaos was only apparent, Nara realized as they drove closer. There was organization hidden within the seeming disorder. Similar components grouped together, pathways maintained between the heaps, evidence of a system understood only by its creator. A weathered sign read simply, "Verns, no trespassing." "Let me do the talking," Eli said as they approached a small office building. The structure looked cobbled together from various materials: corrugated metal, wood, parts of what might have once been a transport container. Vernie's particular. The man who emerged from the office matched his surroundings, worn around the edges, vaguely threatening, but with an unexpected sharpness in his eyes that suggested intelligence beyond his gruff exterior. Tall and lean, with skin tanned to leather by years in the sun, he moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to navigating hazardous terrain. "Eli Foster," Verna said, voice like gravel under tires. "Been a while." "Been busy," Eli replied easily. The familiarity in their exchange suggested a long-standing relationship, though not necessarily friendship. Vern's gaze shifted to Nara, assessing her with uncomfortable intensity. His eyes, pale blue and piercing, seemed to catalog her features with mechanical precision. "Who's your friend?" "Client. Needs some specialized parts." "She got a name?" "Nara," she answered before Eli could, meeting the man's stare without flinching. Better to establish herself directly than be spoken for. A slow smile spread across Verna's weathered face, revealing teeth stained by tobacco or some similar substance. "Not from around here, are you, Nara?" "No." Simple. Director. No elaboration that might complicate the narrative Eli was constructing. "Didn't think so." He turned back to Eli, apparently satisfied with the minimal response. "What kind of parts we talking about?" Eli produced a list he and Nara had compiled that morning, components described in terms this world's technology could approximate. The translation had been challenging, requiring Nara to find parallels between her ship's advanced systems and the primitive equivalents available on Earth. "Looking for these, or anything close enough to modify?" Verna glanced at the list, eyebrows rising slightly. "Experimental aircraft?" "Something like that," Eli replied, the deliberate vagueness serving as both truth and deception. "Gonna cost you. Got those field modulators you've been after, plus the pulse regulators from the Phillips job." Interest flickered across Vern's face. "Those certified?" "Better. Military grade." A silent negotiation seemed to pass between the men before Verna nodded once. "Let me see what I can find." They followed him into the maze of scrap and salvage. Despite the apparent chaos, Verna moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to extract specific pieces from the heaps of metal and electronics. His knowledge of his inventory was impressive, Nara noted. No scanning system, no digital catalog, yet he located each component with uncanny precision. "This what you're looking for?" he asked an hour later, presenting an array of components spread across a work table inside a large shed. The space was surprisingly organized, tools hanging in neat rows, work surfaces clear except for their current project. Nara examined each piece carefully, mentally calculating modifications required. Most were primitive approximations at best, but the basic elements could be repurposed. With sufficient adaptation, they might restore her ship's critical functions. Not enough for interstellar travel, but perhaps enough to complete her mission. "Yes," she decided, "these will work." Vernie named his price, the modulators, regulators, plus additional components Eli had mentioned having in storage. The negotiation was brief, each party apparently satisfied with the terms. "Deal," Eli agreed without hesitation. As Verna packaged the parts, he cast another appraising look at Nara. "Military, right? The way you stand, the way you assess everything. Someone trained you well." Nara remained silent, recognizing the probe for what it was. Verna was more perceptive than his appearance suggested. Verna chuckled at her non-response. "Don't worry, don't care who you work for. Just curious what brings someone like you to a place like this." "Just passing through," she replied evenly. "Aren't we all?" Vern handed the package to Eli, their transaction complete. "Good luck with whatever you're not building." The drive back was quieter, tension radiating from Nara as she processed the interaction. Vern had seen too much, recognized too accurately what she was, or at least what he thought she was. It wasn't his suspicion of her alien nature that concerned her. That would be too fantastic for him to consider. Rather, it was his correct reading of her military training, her difference. It made her wonder how visible her otherness might be to all humans, not just this unusually perceptive one. "He knew I wasn't local," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Vern's observant, ex-military himself from what I've heard." Eli glanced at her before returning his attention to the winding road. "But he's also discreet. Self-preservation. Can't sell to the kind of clients he has if he talks too much. Is that supposed to be reassuring? Just honest. Eli returned his attention to the road, hands steady on the steering wheel. Besides, who would believe him if he started talking about aliens? They reached the crash site by mid-afternoon. The ship sat undisturbed, its dark hull absorbing the desert sun. The damage looked worse in daylight. Torn metal, scorch marks, the impact crater still visible in the hard-packed earth. Nara moved immediately to the command module, activating systems to run diagnostics. The familiar interface responded sluggishly, but responded nonetheless. A good sign. Eli unloaded the parts, arranging them near the damaged engine compartment. How long will repairs take? With these materials? Nara frowned at the readout scrolling across the display. Critical systems were offline, power reserves at minimal levels. 12 hours minimum, assuming no complications. Need an extra pair of hands? She glanced at him, calculating the efficiency gain against the protocol breach. Having his assistance would significantly reduce repair time, but it would also expose him to even more advanced technology. Then again, after all he'd already seen, what difference would it make? Yeah, she admitted. That would be helpful. They worked through the remainder of the day and into the night, Nara directing while Eli executed tasks with surprising skill. His technical aptitude was impressive for someone from a world with such limited technology. He learned quickly, adapting his understanding of mechanical systems to the unfamiliar components of her ship. The communication array proved irreparable with available materials. No distress signal would reach her people. The realization settled heavily in Nara's chest. She was truly alone here, cut off from command, from guidance, from the rigid structure that had defined her existence for as long as she could remember. So what now? Eli asked as they took a brief rest, sharing water and food he'd brought. They sat on a rock formation near the ship, the night sky sprawling above them in a vast tapestry of stars. From here, she could see her home system, just another pinpoint of light among billions. Complete repairs, test systems, attempt to resume mission parameters. Nara's voice was clipped, professional, a retreat into familiar territory as the reality of her situation became clearer. And then what? Your people think you're dead or lost. No backup coming. Eli's expression was thoughtful rather than accusatory. How long can you run a solo mission on a foreign planet? The question crystallized the uncertainty Nara had been avoiding. Without support, without resources, her options were severely limited. The mission might still be completed. Locate the source of the anomalous energy signatures. Determine if they posed a threat, neutralize if necessary. But after that, standard procedure would be to await extraction. With no communication, that would never come. I don't know, she admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Uncertainty was not part of her training. Operatives were taught to have answers, solutions, contingencies for every scenario. This admission of ignorance felt like failure. Eli was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the starry expanse above. You could stay, he suggested finally. Nara looked at him sharply. That would violate every protocol. Forget protocol, Eli interrupted, unusual intensity in his voice. Your ship can't make it back to wherever you came from, not with these patchwork repairs. Your communications are dead. You're alone on a planet that officially doesn't know aliens exist. He paused, meeting her gaze directly. Unless you're not alone. The implication hung between them, impossible yet somehow inevitable. Nara had been trained to maintain distance, to observe but never engage, to complete her mission and return without leaving a trace. Now here was this human offering something entirely different: integration, adaptation, a new existence among those she was meant only to study. You barely know me, Nara said softly, the objection sounding weak even to her own ears. I know enough. Eli's certainty was unsettling. I know you're capable, disciplined, intelligent. I know you're on a mission to protect, not harm. And I know what it's like to not quite fit in the world you're supposed to belong to. That last observation hit closer than Nara would have liked. She'd always been different, more analytical, less emotional, perpetually at a slight remove from others of her kind. It was what made her an excellent operative. It was also what made true connection so elusive. And what would I do here, she asked, the question more genuine than she intended. Whatever you want, Eli replied simply. Help me with repairs. Use your knowledge to improve our technology, subtly, ethically, or just live. Experience something beyond duty and protocol. The possibility unfurled in Nara's mind. freedom from the rigid structures that had defined her existence. No more missions, no more reports, no more measured distance from everything and everyone. It was terrifying. It was tempting. "Let's finish the repairs," she said finally, "one step at a time." They worked through the night, adapting primitive components to advanced systems with increasingly creative solutions. Eli's mechanical intuition proved invaluable, his understanding of basic principles allowing him to grasp the function of alien technology with surprising speed. By dawn, the ship's core systems were operational, if not optimal. As dawn broke, the ship's engines hummed with new energy. Not perfect, but functional. The hull breaches had been sealed, navigation restored, life support stabilized. It wouldn't make it back to her homeworld, but it could fly within this solar system, enough to complete her mission if she chose to continue it. "Should hold for atmospheric flight," Nara concluded, closing the access panel. "Navigational systems at 70% capacity. Life support stable." "Impressive," Eli said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Exhaustion lined his face after the all-night work session, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "So what's next?" Before Nara could answer, the ship's proximity sensors blared to life, a piercing alarm that cut through the quiet morning air. She rushed to the command console, heart racing as she interpreted the readings. The display showed an approaching aircraft, moving fast and direct. Not a casual flyover, not a coincidence. "Ship approaching," she reported tersely. "Large, military grade, coming in fast." "Your people?" Eli asked, hope and concern mingling in his voice. Nara shook her head, dread settling in her stomach. "Number local. Your military must have detected the crash or the repairs. The energy signature of the restored systems would be noticeable to even Earth's primitive scanning technology." Eli moved to her side, peering at the console, though he couldn't read the symbols. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less." Nara's mind raced through options, each less viable than the last. Hide the ship. Impossible given its size. Flee in it? Not without risking interception and potentially causing an international incident. "You need to leave. Now, if they find you here—" "I'm not leaving you," Eli interrupted firmly. "This isn't negotiable. Your presence complicates everything." Nara turned to face him fully, urgency making her voice sharp. "Go, please. They'll think I forced your help. Coercion. It's better that way." Understanding dawned in Eli's eyes. "You're protecting me." "I'm following protocol," Nara insisted, but the lie felt hollow even to her ears. Protocol would dictate neutralizing him as a witness, not protecting him from potential consequences. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, growing steadily louder. Time was running out. "There's another option," Eli said urgently. "We both leave. In the ship. Right now." Nara stared at him, the impossibility of his suggestion rendering her momentarily speechless. "You want to leave Earth?" "Why not?" "My life here is," he gestured vaguely, "solitary, independent. Nothing really tying me down." A smile touched his lips, transforming his exhausted features. "Besides, I've always wanted to see the stars up close." The approaching helicopter was now visible on the horizon, a black speck growing larger by the second. Nara made calculations rapidly. Ship capacity, life support requirements, potential for interception during launch. The vessel was designed for a single pilot, but it could sustain two for a limited time. Enough to reach the nearest outpost, perhaps. "It would be one way," she warned, duty compelling her to ensure he understood the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Even if we evade your military, the ship can't sustain two for an extended journey. We'd have to find a station or outpost willing to take refugees." "Sounds like an adventure," Eli replied, a calm certainty in his voice that defied the chaos of the moment. The helicopter was close enough now that the downdraft began stirring dust around the crash site. Behind it, ground vehicles appeared, military transports moving rapidly across the desert floor. Armed figures visible even at this distance. Decision time. "Last chance to change your mind," Nara said, moving toward the ship's entry hatch. Her pulse raced, not with fear but with a strange electric anticipation. Eli followed without hesitation. "Already made up." Inside, Nara activated launch sequences while Eli secured the hatch. The ship's systems protested the hasty startup, warning lights flashing across control panels. The engines whined, straining against their patchwork repairs. "Strap in," she instructed, sliding into the pilot's seat. "This won't be smooth." Outside, uniformed figures spilled from vehicles, Weapons raised. Orders shouted through megaphones were lost in the growing roar of the ship's engines. Ready? Nara asked, hand poised above the launch control. Eli met her gaze, fear and exhilaration mingling in his eyes. Ready? She activated the launch sequence. The ship shuddered violently, straining against gravity with damaged systems. For a terrible moment, Nara thought they wouldn't break free, that they'd be captured here, between worlds belonging to neither. Then the engines caught properly, and the ship surged upward with unexpected power. The force pressed them back into their seats as they tore through the atmosphere, Earth's blue giving way to the infinite black of space. Warning lights still flashed, systems still protested, but they were away, beyond pursuit, beyond the boundaries that had defined their separate existences. Beautiful, Eli whispered, gazing through the viewport at his world growing smaller behind them. Nara watched him instead, this human who had helped her without agenda, who had chosen to leave everything known for an uncertain future among the stars. Protocol had no framework for this situation, no guidelines for the feeling expanding in her chest. Where to? Eli asked, turning from the viewport to meet her gaze. Nara studied the navigation display, considering the limited options their damaged ship allowed. There's an outpost at the edge of your solar system, neutral territory. We might find help there. Lead the way, Eli said, trust evident in his voice. As the ship limped toward the coordinates, systems stabilizing into a sustainable flight pattern, Nara allowed herself a moment to consider the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had crashed on a primitive planet, been helped by a native, abandoned her mission, taken said native off-world against all regulations and protocols, and somehow, sitting beside this human as they headed into the unknown, she felt more certain than she had in years. Thank you, she said quietly, the words inadequate but necessary. Eli smiled, reaching across the space between them to lightly touch her hand. For what? For fixing something I didn't know was broken. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and solid, a connection bridging the vast differences between their worlds, their experiences, their understanding of the universe. Ahead of them, stars stretched endlessly, each a potential destination. Behind them, Earth receded, becoming just another light in the vast darkness. And between them, something new took shape. Not quite friendship, not quite more, but something real and unbound by protocol. For the first time in her life, Nara wasn't just surviving or completing a mission. She was beginning one without predetermined parameters or expected outcomes, one where she wasn't alone. The ship continued its unsteady journey through the stars, carrying them toward an uncertain future. Warning lights still flashed occasionally on the console, reminding them of the precarious nature of their escape. But neither looked back at what they'd left behind. We'll need a better name for the ship, Eli remarked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. The ship has a designation code, not a name, Nara replied, though without the dismissive tone such a comment would have once carried. Everything that carries people toward a new life deserves a name, Eli insisted. He considered for a moment, then suggested, how about second chance? Nara tested the phrase mentally, finding it strangely appropriate for their situation. Second chance, she repeated. Yes, that will do. The newly christened ship responded as if approving, engines humming a little more smoothly as they accelerated toward the distant outpost and whatever awaited beyond.